My name is Samp. The memory of last November is a sharp, jagged piece of glass embedded in the foundation of my life. It was less than 2 months after our wedding, a celebration I still recall with a painful, blinding joy, that my wife shattered the fragile new reality we had just vowed to build. I was out of town for work, dealing with the predictable stress of a remote project, never imagining the chaos she was weaving back home, a chaos that would redefine everything. The weekend I returned, the air felt thick and wrong, a subtle pressure drop before a storm. I sensed the shift immediately, a defensive rigidity in her posture, a slight hesitation in her eyes that wasn't normally there. When I finally cornered her, my questions were gentle at first, leading to a direct inquiry that she met with a frantic, clumsy lie. The betrayal of the act itself was devastating, but the betrayal in her face, the panicked fiction she tried to sell me, felt like a second, deeper violation of trust. She finally admitted to the infidelity, but her apology was instantly diluted by a cascade of excuses and external factors. The primary culprit, she claimed, was her sudden discontinuation of Lexapro, compounded by heavy intoxication. It was the predictable narrative of diminished responsibility, the chemical alibi that sought to separate the event from her core character. I listened, my mind numb, trying to parse the difference between an honest explanation and a carefully constructed shield. But then, the defensive narrative shifted, becoming a subtle, insidious attack on my character, attempting to introduce a shared culpability. She claimed she no longer felt emotionally connected to me, that a chasm had grown between us in those brief, heady weeks of marriage. She confessed to feeling a deep insecurity that I didn't truly love her, suggesting my affection was conditional or insufficient. Worst of all, she articulated a sense that I didn't truly know myself, implying her chaotic choice was a reaction to my own unsettled interiority. I stood there absorbing the blows, recognizing the chilling brilliance of her defense. By making my internal state the cause of her external action, she deflected the unbearable weight of her guilt. It became less about her choice to betray and more about my failure to be the perfectly secure, perfectly attentive husband she needed. This narrative was designed to introduce doubt into my own certainty, forcing me to question the legitimacy of my pain. This tendency to lash out, to project her deepest self-loathing onto me, was not a new development. It was a recurrent, drunken specter in our relationship. I recalled nights where alcohol stripped away her careful veneer, revealing the raw, envious core of her insecurity. Her words, delivered with a bitter clarity, often aimed directly at the things I held most stable and secure. She had confessed to hating that I earned more money than she did, viewing my financial stability not as a shared asset, but as a personal humiliation. She resented the fact that I didn't possess any profound problems or visible psychological baggage, a perceived lack of trauma that made me feel inaccessible and unfairly well adjusted in her eyes. It was as if my contentment was an insult to her own enduring distress. The bond I shared with my stepdaughter, a relationship of deep mutual affection and easy communication, was another flashpoint of her resentment. She admitted hating that we had a better, more functional relationship than she had with her own family or even with me. It was a painful expression of her longing for effortless connection, a longing she channeled into jealousy rather than emulation. Perhaps the most revealing confessions were those surrounding her own identity within the relationship. She hated that I tried to save her, recognizing my affection as a form of well-meaning, yet fundamentally patronizing project. She had grown comfortable inhabiting the role of the damaged partner, the one who needed repair, and my attempt to pull her out of that darkness felt like a threat to her established identity. She also articulated a perverse satisfaction in being the one who was less messed up in her past relationships, the one whose stability allowed her to be the caregiver or the slightly stronger party. Our dynamic, where I was the financially and emotionally stable center, disrupted that comfortable hierarchy. I recognized that her venomous claims contained kernels of truth about my own occasional over-eagerness, but the vast majority of it was the pure, distilled projection of her own crippling self-hatred and deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. In the hours and days immediately following the truth, we fell into a period of raw, exhausting, yet intensely intimate conversation. There was a strange, hollow closeness that emerged from the rubble of the shattered trust. She performed the role of the remorseful spouse with a convincing, heart-wrenching sincerity that I desperately wanted to believe. She cried she held me, and she asked questions that forced us both into uncomfortable, honest territory. She explained the specific emptiness she felt, the void she tried to fill with a fleeting, Careless encounter. She articulated the specific moment the switch flipped in her mind, the momentary lapse in judgment that felt like a catastrophic break from her own moral compass. She walked me through her thought process, her emotions, and the agonizing guilt that followed, saying all the right, textbook things that a betrayed spouse yearns to hear. This vulnerability, this shared descent into the darkest parts of our marital beginning, gave me a fragile sense of hope. She told me, repeatedly, that she felt closer to me through this chaos, claiming that my willingness to listen to her ugliest truths was the proof she truly needed of my unwavering love. I clung to this idea, that the wound itself could become the source of our deepest connection. Her expressions of profound sorrow and her determined promise to change were the life raft I grasped in that tumultuous sea of pain. She made me feel seen, truly loved, and completely necessary to her future. It was a false dawn, but in that moment it was enough. I allowed myself to be convinced that we could, in fact, use this terrible, foundational fracture as the crucible for a stronger, more resilient bond. I allowed the hope of rebuilding to override the screeching alarm bells of my intuition. And so, we chose to try. We embarked on the agonizing, uphill climb of reconciliation, driven by a shared, desperate belief that the marriage was worth saving. The idea of losing her, of facing the public shame and private devastation of a marriage ending before its first anniversary felt too enormous to bear. We decided to fight to endure the pain, and to trust her promises of change. It has now been 10 months since that discovery, 10 months of walking a silent, painful tightrope above a canyon of doubt. Not a single day has passed where the pain hasn't resurfaced, a dull, pervasive ache that shadows every moment of domestic harmony. The work of healing has been entirely one-sided. A choice I have to make every morning. When I open my eyes, the choice to show up, to smile, and to perform the role of the trusting husband. My commitment has been unwavering. I have swallowed the suspicion, bitten back the questions, and tried to focus only on her positive actions. I have been a sentinel guarding the fragile peace, expending immense emotional energy to simply exist within the same four walls without exploding into accusation. It is a lonely, thankless, and utterly exhausting grind. This process of reconciliation that feels more like endurance. To her credit, she made several significant, tangible changes. She quit drinking entirely in January, recognizing alcohol as the primary catalyst for her worst behaviors and poor decision-making. This was a massive step, a commitment to sobriety that indicated a serious effort toward self-control and respect for our future. It was a change I celebrated quietly, seeing it as a sign of her sincerity. She even created an online presence, starting a sober, living TikTok account, dedicating herself to a community of recovery and open discussion about the struggles of maintaining sobriety. I saw this as proof that she was working on herself, that she was committed to transparency and growth. It was a beacon of hope, a demonstration of the changed behavior she promised, giving me something concrete to hold on to when the doubts arose. Then, about a week ago, out of the blinding blue, the fragile peace was shattered. The wound violently ripped back open. He, the man, the affair partner, reached out to her via a direct message on her sober TikTok account. This was not some random social media interaction. This was a deliberate intrusion from the past, a ghost reaching across the digital divide to remind us that he still existed, that the chapter was not fully closed. The way she handled it felt immediately suspicious, a cascade of small, jarring details that amplified my panic. She claimed she simply forgot to block him in the initial cleanup, an explanation that strained credulity given the intimate nature of their brief involvement and the severity of the crisis it caused. Her inability to perform such a simple, necessary boundary-setting action felt like a profound lapse in judgment, or worse, a subtle, unconscious yearning for continued access. She only informed me after the fact, saying that by the time I brought it up, having seen a notification or a lingering chat window, he was already blocked. Her description of the interaction was dismissive and clinical. "Who don't like my videos?" followed by the block. But the simplicity of her response did nothing to soothe the tidal wave of anxiety and humiliation that crashed over me. That single notification, that tiny digital ping, threw me right back to day one. It wasn't about the content of the message, it was about the mere possibility. I tried to explain to her the immense emotional gravity of the situation, telling her this isn't just TikTok to me. It's not a random stranger or a forgotten high school friend. It's a living, breathing connection to the trauma that almost destroyed our life together. This man is not a faceless mistake. He is someone she has known since childhood, a man who is part of her established history. I have met him, shaken his hand, and now the knowledge of their shared secret poisons every past and future interaction. The fact that he felt comfortable enough to reach out suggests a perceived opening, a sense that the door was not fully, irrevocably slammed shut. That is the core of the terror. The thought of him having access, of him watching her journey on social media, immediately sends my mind spiraling back into the fear and uncertainty of the last November. Now, every time we attend a family event, every gathering with her relatives and lifelong friends, I am consumed by the same agonizing questions: who knows, who doesn't, and who is quietly judging me. I move through crowded rooms, feeling the shame of the betrayal reflected back at me, convinced that everyone sees the word "fool" written across my forehead in invisible ink. My attempts to discuss this latest trigger, to articulate the depth of my renewed pain and humiliation, have been met with a jarring and painful coldness. The emotional wellspring of remorse that flowed so freely 10 months ago seems to have dried up completely, leaving behind only the hard, dry facts of her commitment. Her responses are now rote, functional phrases designed to terminate the discussion rather than engage with the emotion. It is always the same handful of lines, delivered with a detached flatness. "I'm sorry," or "I love you." These words, once comforting, now sound like empty affirmations, like a password required to pass through a gate, devoid of the genuine, felt emotional connection she displayed immediately after the confession. I yearn for the empathy, the recognition of the damage, but I only receive the verbal equivalent of a shrug. When I press her for deeper engagement, she retreats further into the defense that her changed behavior and commitment should be apology enough. She argues that her sobriety, her devotion to the marriage, and her daily presence are the only validation I should need. It's a compelling, pragmatic argument, but it fails to address the emotional and psychological need for her to acknowledge the immense, ongoing trauma that I carry. We have recently begun actively trying for a baby, a decision that now looms large and complicated in the shadow of this new crisis. I cannot determine if this is a sincere, powerful demonstration of her commitment to our shared future, a profound way of saying I am tied to you irrevocably, or, conversely, if it is a calculated unconscious maneuver to cement the relationship, to create an emotional distraction, or to provide her with a new, all-consuming identity that distracts from her past failures. The desire for a child is real for both of us, but the timing, now fraught with renewed suspicion, feels like a massive, terrifying gamble. I look at the future we are trying to create and wonder if we are building it on the foundation of love and reconciliation, or on the unstable sand of co-dependency and denial. It is a question that gnaws at my conscience every night, making the intimate act of creation feel like a high-stakes roll of the dice. About a week ago, after enduring a particularly rough, draining field visit for work that left me emotionally and physically exhausted, I came home desperate for comfort. I decided that this was the moment to open up about my emotional load, to simply let her know that the recent contact had profoundly wounded me and that I was struggling to put the smile back on. It was a plea for soft understanding, a request for simple empathy. Instead of meeting my vulnerability with kindness, her defenses immediately went up, and she executed a devastating counterattack. She turned the entire conversation around, launching into a criticism of my character and our dynamic. She told me I have no hobbies, that my life revolves entirely around her, and that she feels intensely smothered by my constant presence and emotional demands. The most stinging accusation was the claim that I am clocking her every move, or asking too many intrusive questions. This was a direct, calculated attempt to make my pain her burden, to recast my legitimate anxiety as controlling behavior. The irony was devastating. Just 2 weeks prior, in a rare moment of introspection, she had used almost those exact same words to describe her own internal state, minus the clocking part. She had confessed to feeling rudderless, trapped by her own routines, and in need of external stimulation. She was taking her own suppressed feelings, her lack of direction, and her fear of being too dependent, and throwing them onto me as a weapon. This moment was more damaging than the TikTok incident because it involved a complete rejection of my emotional reality and a refusal to take accountability for the pain she caused. It confirmed that the deep, authentic connection she had promised in the early days of reconciliation was perhaps gone forever, replaced by this rigid, defensive hostility. At least she apologized for the cruelty of her words later that night, a retraction that felt compulsory rather than sincere. It was an acknowledgement that the words were unfair, But it did nothing to undo the sting of the accusation or the truth that her defensive impulse was to attack my character when she felt challenged. The damage had been done, cementing the feeling that I could no longer trust her to be my soft place to land. In her defensive barrage, she also dredged up the past, weaponizing my own insecurities from the early stages of our relationship. She kept bringing up how, in the first 2 years of dating, long before the marriage and the actual betrayal, I had occasionally accused her of cheating or acting inappropriately. It was a clumsy, hurtful attempt to establish a pattern of my being the suspicious, untrusting one, thereby excusing her current lack of emotional transparency. It was true, my anxieties, rooted in my own family history, had caused moments of unwarranted suspicion back then. But I told her, patiently, that I didn't want to keep dredging up old, resolved issues just to make her feel bad or to justify her current coldness. I explained that those were past insecurities, born of fear, and that I didn't want to use them to bludgeon her into submission. Her response to this attempt at mutual forbearance was chilling in its dark, self-punishing clarity. She looked at me, her eyes flat and empty, and said, "Well, at least this time I deserve it." The words hung in the air, heavy with a profound sense of self-hatred that simultaneously confirmed her guilt and completely invalidated my attempt at compassion. I didn't even know how to respond to that. It was a statement that was both an apology and a refusal of forgiveness, a confession that she still viewed herself as irredeemable. It implied that my current mistrust, the mistrust born of actual, proven betrayal, was merely a continuation of my old, baseless anxieties, but this time, the anxiety was justified. It was her way of saying, "I know I'm damaged goods, and you're right to treat me like it." That single phrase encapsulated the entire tragedy of our situation. It revealed that she wasn't truly healed or reconciled with herself. She was still operating from a place of deep, chronic pain and self-loathing. It showed me that her guilt hadn't transformed into health, it had merely hardened into defensive resignation. How can you build a future with someone who believes they deserve the cruelty you are currently inflicting on them? The daily reality of my life is now an intricate, exhausting performance. Every morning, I put on a practiced, convincing smile and try to embody a happiness I haven't felt in nearly a year. I try to be the supportive husband, the one who is focused on the future and the prospect of building a family. I try to believe in the narrative of healing that we have so painstakingly constructed. But beneath the surface, the pain is a constant, knowing presence. I have experienced loss and grief before, but I have truly never felt a pain like this. A pain that is so corrosive, so invasive, because it is rooted in the destruction of the very foundation of my identity and future. It is a pain that forces me to question my judgment, my worth, and the entire history of our connection. And with this latest incident, the digital reach of the affair partner, the cold deflection, the weaponizing of my vulnerability, and the devastating "I deserve it" comment, it feels as though the wound has been violently ripped back open, tearing away the fragile scab of 10 months' work. All the progress, all the intentional effort to trust and to forgive has been nullified by a single notification and a few harsh words. I can't stop feeling this way because this isn't merely an emotional injury. It is a profound existential uncertainty. I don't know who I am anymore outside of this conflict, and I don't know who she is either. I am left staring at the unbearable truth I have been showing up to a reconciliation that she is no longer emotionally present enough to sustain. The man who retired early to build his family is now standing amidst the ruins, desperately trying to rebury the dead, knowing that his efforts are futile. The only thing I feel certain of now is the weight of the smile I have to carry, the exhaustion of the performance, and the agonizing realization that the emotional gap between us is only widening. I don't know what comes next, but I know I cannot continue to live with this feeling of self-betrayal, allowing my own pain to be weaponized in the name of a doomed commitment.